Good morning, everybody. Welcome on behalf of all the people at Trinity Lutheran Church. My name is Pastor Dan Poffenberger. It's great to see you all here today. And again, can we say thank you to our bells? And if you notice, there's some new faces this fall into the bell choir. Well done, Deb. And we've got one special visitor that I want to call attention to. For those of you who've been part of Trinity for an extended period of time, you will remember the name of Pastor Betsy Dart, and she's with us this morning. And Betsy, if you would just stand where you are for just a second. So make sure to find her after worship and love her up just a little bit, okay? She was here yesterday and also helped us celebrate Norma Swanson's 90th birthday here at church. And I don't know, I didn't see Norma on the way in. Is she here today? There she is. Norma, would you just stand for a second and could we say happy birthday to her as well? And if all of us could look half that good at 90, we'd all be gunning for it, wouldn't we? Yeah. I'm going to take a little more serious tack now to introduce this worship service to you. During the course of this year, we are intersecting God's story by the use of the narrative lectionary, which walks us through God's story in Scripture through this worship year. And we've been spending some time now in the Old Testament, which we will do right up until the season of Advent. And you know, we find our own identity in these stories. If you don't know your story, you don't know who you are. It's the way in which faith has been transmitted from one generation to the next. And today, in worship, we're going to rehearse this story in a very kind of personal way today. The story, which I'll share with you in a minute, is the story of King David, greatest king of Israel, at a moment in his life where his relationship with God and with himself, and even with his kingship, was severely broken. And so today we're going to hear the story right now at the beginning of the worship service. And it will take us into a time of confession. We will sing a song that will remind us of the gracious nature of God. And here's the duality of most of our life, is that we have knowledge and we have of the grace of God, and we have that narrative in our head and in our heart, and we know God is ever present and God is ever merciful. On the other hand, from time to time, we have a narrative going on in our life about our own sin and about our own brokenness. And sometimes we're blocked at that point from hearing the grace of God. And so today in our worship service, we're going to start with this story, move into a time of confession. As David responds to the story that you're about to hear, it is understood in the history of Israel that then he wrote Psalm 51. And we will hear that read today, and you will remember it from the sung liturgy of the church. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew in me a right spirit. And I think when you hear this story of David, you will understand even in a greater sense the depth of that psalm. And we're going to stay in that moment of confession for most of our service. I'll come back in the sermon time to just resolve the story a little bit, and then we will hear the words of forgiveness during communion today, and then we will have a complete rehearsal of this story of David and the prophet Nathan and God's mercy. Okay? So the story goes like this. King David was in the midst of all of his success as king. He was well loved and well thought of, and there was a war going on with the Ammonites, and David had sent the soldiers under the lead of a man named Joab to do battle with the Ammonites. And then, one morning, David rises and goes to the top of his house to take in the city and the morning, and he sees this young woman named Bathsheba taking a bath on her roof. And he is taken with her, and he sends for her. She comes to him. They have an affair. We find out that she is pregnant. Now, I don't know the story from Bathsheba's point of view. My feeling is that it would be a very difficult story to be summoned by the king, a married woman. I'm not exactly sure she had freedom at this point, but that's for another day. David hears of her pregnancy. Bathsheba is married to a man named Uriah, who is a soldier. David arranges that Uriah be taken to the very front lines of the battle, and arranges with the commander that the battle should proceed in such a way that they advance upon the enemy, and then everyone but Uriah retreat. David's first strategy, however, was to call Uriah home from the battlefront, to have him sleep with his wife so the pregnancy could be obscured. Uriah comes and meets with David. They have an awkward conversation, king to soldier. I can only imagine the amount of energy David was expending to try to explain why this was actually happening. But then he says to Uriah, just go home now. And Uriah, being the good soldier he was, says, I can't go home and sleep with my wife when my friends and comrades are in battle. I will stay here. David, frustrated by that attempt, shares drinking with Uriah in hopes to get him inebriated and then send him home. He gets him inebriated, but he still refuses to go home and says, I'll just sack out here. And he does. That's when David hatches his plan to send Uriah now back to the front and to have him advance on the enemy and to see his comrades retreat. And it happens. And Uriah is shot down, and Bathsheba is widowed. David sends for Bathsheba again, takes her as his wife. Then I'll read just part of the scripture at this point. You see, every king had their prophet. And David's prophet was Nathan. Nathan knew what had happened. And they have this encounter. Nathan came to David and said to him, told him this story. There were two men in a certain city. One was very rich, and one was very poor. And the rich man had many flocks of all kinds, herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and this lamb grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his meager fare and drink from the man's cup. And this little sheep would lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and the rich man was loath to take one of his own sheep or herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared that for the guest who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man in the story, and he said to the prophet Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore that lamb fourfold because he did this thing and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, you are the man. You. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house. I gave you everything, and if that had been too little, I would have added much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do this evil thing? You have struck Uriah down. From this moment, David writes Psalm 51.